Number 5. Sandy McNulty, age 27, had just recently gone through a divorce. Within the same month, she signed up for Match.com, and a few days later, received a strange email. The email addressed Sandy by her full name, with a long paragraph explaining that the sender knew of her recent breakup and thought that they would make a great couple. The sender asked for Sandy to get back to him about what she thought. The email was signed anonymously, but there was also a file attached to it. It was a large picture of a man's genitalia. She assumed it was her ex at first, but the picture did not resemble him, and when confronted, he was sincere in telling her that it wasn't him. Plus, she told that he wasn't the type to do anything like this. Sandy continued to receive emails from the anonymous sender, with each one getting more angry and aggressive. She did the best she could of ignoring it, until attached to one of the emails was a picture of the side of her house taken at night. She blocked the sender's email finally, and that was the last she ever heard from any of this. It's still unknown whether it was the ex sending the emails or not. Number 4. A former Reddit user at one point posted a story of a scary email he received. He had one day received a text message from an unknown number telling him to check his email as soon as possible. He obliged and found a message in all capitals titled, "Download this now." It was a short message addressed to the user with his full name, address, phone number, and all. There were 5 files attached, 4 of them pictures, and one an exe file titled, "Download this now." Each one of the pictures were very personal to the user. The first one a picture of his house, the second a picture of a very young woman who he eventually recognized to be his mom, the third a picture of him as a baby, and the fourth a random picture of a creepy-looking middle-aged man. The user didn't open the exe file. He instead reported the email to the police. It's unknown what the exe file was. The Reddit post was taken down within the same month. Number 3. Father David of a small New York town church had an email address dedicated to his church. He received a strange email with no title, and upon opening it, his computer crashed and he got a blue screen. He would have trouble restarting it until finally successfully logging on to have all his files and data gone, and his screen wallpaper was a large and shockingly disturbing and realistic image of Satan. Internet Explorer, along with other important programs, would not open, and occasionally, a distorted laughing sound effect would play in the background. It's unknown how this was accomplished, but it was most likely just a very cruel prank by a hacker with a little too much time on his hands. Number 2. In the year 2009, a huge wave of emails filled with viruses was spreading across the internet. The email titles were innocent enough. For example, some of them were titled, "Free 40% off coupon to Target." However, once opened, a virus would be forcibly installed into the user's computer without their knowledge. These viruses were known to allow all activity on the user's computer to be monitored, sometimes even giving partial or full control over the computers, and sometimes even enabling the built-in webcams to the computers, secretly spying on the users as they used their computers without them ever even knowing. Nobody could seem to figure out how this was accomplished or how to prevent it, but luckily, the swarm of emails eventually died down on its own. Similar swarms of emails have since occurred on a few occasions, but not as dangerous. Number 1. The girl in this story is very sensitive about this and refuses to give her real name, so for the purpose of this story, she'll be referred to as Jen. Jen was attending freshman year in high school. She was a very pretty girl and got the attention of a lot of guys, both young and, unfortunately, much older as well. She received an email from the dean explaining that her grades could be improved and he would like to talk to her about it at some point. Strangely, he left a note at the bottom of the email informing Jen not to respond to the email. A week passed and Jen received another email from the dean. This time, he asked her to meet him at the back of the school at 7 a.m. before classes started. Jen walked to school and went around back this one day and could see somebody poking their head out from behind one of the dumpsters, not the dean. She ran all the way home and the parents reported this to the school. It turned out the dean of the school didn't send the messages at all. The email was traced back to a website that allows you to send fake anonymous emails, and the computer used to send it was the computer in the furthest corner of the local library. There was this time long ago that I was in charge of watching my cousin and his 4 friends while they slept over. My uncle was paying me $100 to watch them for the night. All I did was play video games with a bunch of 10-year-olds for most of the night. I thought it would be the easiest $100 I ever made, but things took a huge turn for the worse. when I heard footsteps coming from upstairs. We were in the basement, still playing video games. 2 of the kids also heard the sounds. I counted 5 kids sitting on the couches, and neither my aunt or uncle were supposed to be home that night. I swallowed my gum when I realized the basement door was wide open. I told them to stay there while I ran upstairs to shut the door. The door didn't have a lock from the inside, only the outside. I called to the kids to hide in the workout room. I shut the TV and all the lights and then followed the kids into the workout room. We listened in the dark as the footsteps approached the basement door, and then the horrible sound of the basement door opening, followed by heavy steps stomping down each stair, one by one. One of my cousin's friends were crying. I had to tell them to shut the hell up. I leaned against the door, with a chair, along with a bunch of barbell weights wedged against it. I listened as the door to the boiler room was opened, and a few moments later, closed. Screams of children filled the room as the doorknob to the workout room began to turn. I pushed the door with all my might to keep it shut. Whoever was on the other side quickly gave up as we heard rushed footsteps going up the stairs. I heard the footsteps right above our heads moving in the direction of the front door. This was before everybody had cell phones, so calling somebody first wasn't an option. I scanned the whole house, finding that the front door had been left open and all the bedrooms upstairs had been trashed. Nobody was in the house, so I called the kids up. A few things had been stolen, but as long as nobody was hurt, we were all happy. It was during a blizzard in Valley Stream. I was getting paid $250 to watch some couple's kid while they went away for the weekend. His name was Matthew. This took place on the first night, which was a Friday night. Matthew was already supposedly asleep, while I was in the living room watching a movie. I got a knock at the door, and looked at the clock. It was close to midnight. There was no way I was opening it. Not even 10 seconds later, I heard the sound of 2 or 3 men angrily banging on the door, telling me to open up. I felt like my heart was about to stop. I took a peek through the blinds, and there was somebody standing right on the other side of the window. I fell back in fear, and after managing to get back on my feet, I ran to the kitchen phone first thing to call the police. They said because of the weather, it could take a while for an officer to get here. I was told to take the child and hide somewhere until an officer arrived. They wanted to keep me on the line, but I wasn't thinking clearly in the heat of the moment and hung up. However, it wasn't until I ran through the living room that I realized the banging had stopped. I took a second peek through the living room window. Nobody was there now. I heard the sound of glass shattering from a few rooms over. My knees started to feel weak as I realized they had just broken the window and were about to climb into the house. I had to run and get Matthew. I couldn't just leave without him. Of course, when I got upstairs, there was no time left to run back downstairs, as I already heard footsteps and laughter coming from downstairs. I covered Matthew's mouth with my hands as I ran with him into his toy closet. A few minutes dragged on to what felt like half an hour as we sat there in the dark closet. Matthew began to squeal as footsteps on the carpet reached the outside of his bedroom door. There was more than one person. They came inside. There weren't many places to hide in this room. I was actually reflecting on my whole life, so sure I was gonna die. We heard the sound of a police siren outside, even from in the closet, and then I heard one of the men in the room mutter, "Oh shit." I opened the door back up as I heard at least 3 pairs of footsteps hurriedly rushing down the stairs. They didn't get far, as the police later found their footprints in the backyard, leading to our shed. There were 5 men in total, and they were all arrested. I was 15 years old, still babysitting since I couldn't get a real job. This was by far the most horrifying experience of my life. Me and this kid I was babysitting, his name was Mike, were taking a walk with his dog through the woods in his backyard. His dog stopped, ears pointed up straight, and paw in the air. The dog started barking, pulling, and going crazy. He noticed something, and we were nervous that it was a black bear, so I told Mike to turn around and walk back to the house. I struggled to pull the dog in the other direction, and then I noticed what he was barking at. Beyond a big tree was some guy just standing there, staring up at me. I yelled out, asking to him if he needed something, and with that, he turned around and walked off. I was genuinely freaked the fuck out. The dog calmed down at this point, so walking back was easier for a few minutes, until yet again, the dog started freaking out about something behind us. I couldn't see what it was, but I was worried it was the same guy as before, and that he might have been following me. I was tempted to unleash the dog on this guy, but that seemed like a bad idea. I didn't look back for the rest of the way back to the house, but the dog continued to bark and pull. I did the best I could to run, or at least walk fast. I made sure for a good half hour that we weren't followed to the house, checking every window and door routinely. I thought it was safe to eventually play Mario Kart with Mike and forget about what happened, but my worst fear came true, when right outside the window in the patio, I heard the sound of one of the toy buckets falling over. Turning on the patio light, I could see that a green bucket full of beach toys and balls had been knocked over. There was no way some small animal could do that. The dog was once again going crazy, barking at something. I told Mike to get me his dad's hunting rifle. Maybe that was dumb to have an 8-year-old get a gun for me, but I didn't have time to think rationally. There continued to be strange noises coming from all around the outside of the house. There was some taps on the windows, chimes being pushed, things falling over, but I eventually caught a glimpse of him through one of the windows. He was walking past until he noticed me and stopped. I lifted the gun up to show him that we were armed. He didn't run away right away though. He stood there crouched like some kind of creature, staring right into my soul. He finally walked back into the woods. I didn't sleep much that night, jumping at every small cracking noise. A week later, I got a call from Mike's parents. They told me a creepy-looking man had been stalking their house from the woods. They asked me to describe what the man that I saw looked like again. I couldn't give a good description, as I didn't see much of his face, but I assured them it was the same man. They practically begged me to babysit on a few occasions after this, but I always respectfully declined. That was a while ago, and I have no idea what's become of this family today, and what's become of the man stalking their house. I would frequently babysit back between the ages of 15 and 18. I lived close to a relatively wealthy area where people were more generous in terms of pay. There was never a shortage of need for babysitters either, so I made a decent amount of money. I've definitely had to take care of some stranger kids, but this one takes the prize. Right from the moment I met Michael, he seemed really quiet and weird. He was 12 years old too, which some might argue is more than old enough to be home alone, but maybe not overnight. They needed me to stay overnight. His parents told me he could be a bit strange sometimes and may need some extra attention. I didn't really need to do much though. In the room that I would be sleeping in was a huge toy closet, big enough to fit a big Lego play table with a bunch of Legos and other toys sitting on top of it. Michael was up there for most of his time building with Legos and other toys. I didn't really spy on him too much, I just let him do his own thing. But I heard him constantly talking in there, as if someone were with him, not play talking. I could only assume he had some kind of problems, and that's what his parents were hinting at. He came down eventually to eat some of the leftovers in the fridge, but then went right back up to his closet. It wasn't until I finally told him it was time to go to sleep that he left the closet. I just wanted to go to sleep myself. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to sounds coming from the closet. Sounds of toys, like Legos. I called out to Michael to go to sleep. The sound stopped. The light wasn't on in the closet, so I was confused as to how the hell he could be playing in the dark. I went over to open the closet and turn the light on. Michael didn't seem to be in there. I dismissed the noises. I wasn't a paranoid person. I fell back asleep. I'd say an hour later, I woke up to partial brightness in the room. The closet light was on, but the door was shut. I called Michael's name again. I was pissed now. I saw the outlines of feet at the bottom of the closet door, and then heard a little giggle as if Michael were messing with me. I knew he was in there now. I marched over and threw open the door, and literally fell back in horror when nobody at all was in there. Where the two outlines of feet were, there was nothing now. I felt a pain in my chest from the fear. I ran to Michael's room to find him asleep in his bed. I locked his door and laid down on his floor. Just being next to another person made me feel a little safer. I fell asleep on the floor, and when the parents returned the next day, I decided to keep quiet about what I witnessed. I say what I witnessed because I know what happened. I got paid and left, and never had to worry about it again. Of course, it still sends chills up my spine thinking about it, and I still have no idea what to believe. You can feel comfort in storing your private belongings inside lockers and other storage devices. However, sometimes the private belongings found inside these storage devices are rather strange and disturbing.
Number 10.
The only time it's acceptable to keep around a headless doll is the 5 minutes between the dog ripping the head off and you discovering it. When someone stores a headless doll among knives, it's most likely a problem. Robert Dewey Hoskins, who was rearrested after escaping from a mental hospital in February of 2012, was convicted of threatening to murder Madonna, and that headless baby doll was found in his storage unit in Long Beach. LA Weekly reports on the 10 creepiest items found in the Madonna stalker's storage unit. Besides the headless baby doll and dozens of knives, Hoskins kept a very scary clown mask, a sumo wrestler baby doll, a Barbie backpack, and so much more.
Number 9.
A married couple with 2 kids made a horrific discovery when the mother, Mrs. Copeland, found a safe in her 10-year-old son's room. When questioned about where he got it and its contents, he simply pleaded the fifth. Both parents were unable to get any info out of their son. Eventually, Mr. Copeland was able to pry the safe open and was shocked at what he found inside. The head of their dog that had recently passed and was buried in their yard was stuffed into the safe. Blood poured out of the box as Mr. Copeland screamed in horror. Their son said he loved that dog so much that he wanted to have a part of her forever, so he dug up the body, cut off its head with a tiny kitchen knife, and stuffed it in the safe that was found by the mother later on that same day.
Number 8.
Some people like to take their work home with them, but Dr. Michael Birkland, a former medical examiner, took his work to a storage unit in Pensacola. And when I say work, I'm talking about body parts for more than 100 people. All this creepiness was discovered in August 2012 when some poor soul bought the contents of Dr. Birkland's unit at a storage auction. It seems that Dr. Birkland's hobby included the storing of 10 brains as well as other body parts like lungs, hearts, and tissue samples. Dr. Birkland was thrifty as well as creepy, keeping a heart stored in a styrofoam cup. Police noted that formaldehyde was leaking from the cracked lid. The body parts, which were harvested during private autopsies performed inside funeral homes in Florida, were also found inside Tupperware containers, trash bags, and specimen cups. Interestingly, Dr. Birkland was fired from his job as a medical examiner in 2003 for failing to complete autopsy reports in a timely manner and for keeping a big backlog of cases.
Number 7.
Unit B8 in U-Store Self-Storage in Clearwater, Florida, held something that couldn't be auctioned off when the family fell behind on payments in January of 2012. When the storage facility manager told the family that the contents were going to be sold, the truth came out. Among the banana boxes and old TVs rested the grandma's skeletal remains. Authorities identified the grandma as Anne Bunch, born on January 1st, 1900. Since the woman's death in 1995, her remains had been stored inside a painted blue coffin in a storage unit that wasn't air-conditioned. For 17 years, her remains rested inside a warm storage unit. The body had been properly prepared for burial by a funeral home in Alabama, which explains the lack of odor.
Number 6.
A lot of people refuse to go to public pools, and maybe this will be one more reason. An elderly man named Jacob Pastor, who swam in a public pool in Colorado, used the same locker in the changing room every time he visited. A lot of the lockers went unused, as most people didn't even need to use them, and it wasn't a very crowded pool to begin with. One unfortunate day, however, perhaps he had tired himself out a little too much and opened the wrong locker, the one right next to his usual one. The skeletal remains of a human fell out from the locker almost as if it were tackling him to the ground. By the looks of it, the body that once was had been in there for years, as it was fully decomposed. It looked as though somebody had been forcefully jammed in there, or perhaps they simply got stuck in there themselves. That mystery will remain unsolved.
Number 5.
Imager user Oldswagon is a reformed thief who earns money on the side by unlocking safes for people, but little did he know that this job could lead to him helping solve a vile crime. A landlord contacted the lockmaster to help him bust into a safe that one of his tenants had left behind, but neither of them were prepared for what was lurking inside. Once Oldswagon had disabled the lock by hot wiring it, the safe swung open and revealed that things would have gone very differently if he had used an acetylene torch to bust through the door, because inside, as pictured, they found a live grenade. Unfortunately, the live grenade was one of the more innocent items concealed within the safe's near impenetrable metal walls. The SD cards pictured were all filled with child pornography, and the journal was so depraved that Volkswagen wrote, "I thumbed through it, and I won't tell you what was in it so that you could actually sleep tonight." The authorities were informed of the upsetting material, and all of the items pictured were confiscated to help find a perpetrator who is believed to have been running a child pornography ring.
Number 4.
In Fort Collins, Colorado, 1987, a school locker was searched after the murder of a local girl named Peggy Hetrick, and the police never forgot what they found. Timothy Lee Master's locker was crammed full of over 2,200 pages of violent writings and horrific drawings of mutilated bodies, with some of them resembling the scene where Hetrick was murdered. The 15-year-old pupil was found guilty at trial and sentenced to life imprisonment, but he was eventually acquitted in 2008 when advances in forensic science cleared him of acting out his sick fantasies in real life. Peggy Hetrick's killer has never been caught.
Number 3.
When Mr. Shannon Wisnett bought a barbecue smoker from an auction storage unit, it contained a human leg. The severed limb was wrapped in tinfoil, but when police traced its owner, the leg's origins turned out to be distinctly less murderous than they were expecting. The former owner of the storage unit, Mr. John Wood, was involved in a plane crash in 2004. That meant his leg had to be amputated below the knee. He opted to keep the limb so he could be buried with it, but somehow forgot that he had put it in storage.
Number 2.
When she was refurbishing a derelict home, Ann Contola discovered a wall safe hidden behind a plasterwork. Convinced it might hold something of value, she called a locksmith to crack it open. But instead of riches, she was greeted with a handful of human teeth.
Number 1.
Reddit user by the name of Lumberjack found a bizarre hidden crawl space in his house, but it was the locked safe within that contained the most spine-chilling material. The tiny place designed to fit a water heater was carpeted and led to a mysterious black door that was locked. In order to be able to sleep in the house ever again, Lumberjack broke through the door and was greeted by a black sentry safe that was looming in the corner. When the safe was opened, it contained numerous VHS tapes that didn't seem to contain innocent home movies. "No, no, no, no" could be found written on one of the tapes. As if that weren't bad enough, there was also a chilling note in ominous dripping black ink, saying, "Save yourself." 8 months ago, Lumberjack told the Reddit community that he had turned in the tapes to the police. The following stories may have some credible or even confirmed details. However, that doesn't prove there was really any alien encounter, nor am I claiming that any of these stories are true. Number 10. One night, Betty and Barney Hill were driving home from their vacation in Canada. They saw what they first assumed was a shooting star, until it moved upward. The two of them got out of their car, curiosity overtaking their sense of reason for a moment. While they were looking at the UFO, it suddenly veered right at them. Naturally, the two rushed back to their car and took off, but this wasn't the end of their experience. They claimed to have lost 2 hours that they cannot account for. They recalled repressed memories of an abduction while they were hypnotized, and both claimed that their watches stopped after the incident. Number 9. In 2007, Dennis Avahente started waking up to strange noises in his kitchen routinely every night, like pots and pans rustling. Every time he would check, he wouldn't find anything. Then one night, he woke up to a figure standing by his bedroom door. Strangely, he found himself unable to move, as if he were experiencing sleep paralysis. He somehow fell back asleep. The next night, he woke again and saw the same figure, this time much closer and much easier to make out its features. It was tall, skinny, a big long head, and the slightest glow in its eyes. Dennis couldn't move or scream or anything. He watched as the figure slowly left the room, and moments later, he claimed he could move again. The first thing he did was check the window to the backyard, and that's where he claimed to have seen the craft taking off. He was missing a lot of food and fertilizer after the happening. The strange thing, many residents of the town claim to have seen strange lights at night throughout that week, some even travelers from out of state. For what it's worth, there was also a large circular crevice in the ground, right where Dennis claimed the craft had landed. Number 8. 3 women were driving near Stanford, Kentucky when they were allegedly abducted by aliens. Afterward, all 3 women were given hypnosis sessions, and all of them had the same story. They even took a lie detector test and passed with flying colors. At the very least, they all believed it happened. Even stranger, many people in the area reported a UFO sighting around the same time the women were abducted. Number 7. One man in Texas claims to have escaped from aliens that abducted him. To support his claims, he supplied pictures that he believes to prove the incident happened. While these pictures may prove enough for some, many will need much better pictures to believe in UFOs. Supposedly, a large UFO was seen near the Dallas Air Force Base in Texas, and some witnesses say it's shown up many times in the surrounding area. Others claim to have seen multiple pulsating orbs near the Georgetown area of Texas. These UFOs were all lined up in 2 rows. Then they vanished. Number 6. Peter Corey was asleep on his couch when he woke up to find 2 strange women in his house. One had blonde hair, the other appeared to be Asian, and the blonde one was clearly in charge. The blonde woman pushed his head into her breast several times, which disoriented him, so he bit down on her breast. The woman didn't appear to react or bleed from the injury. Then the women left. Corey later found a blonde hair that was constricting his foreskin. It should be noted that Corey recently suffered a serious head injury, but the hair makes the story harder to explain. Number 5. A woman named Sonia believed that she was abducted, and days later, she saw a helicopter that was piloted by a strange man in black. That same night, her daughter complained about something pulling at her leg. After this, her husband put CCTVs in the house to record any further happenings. Some who saw the video believe her story, but others may not be so easily convinced. The video shows Sonia instantly disappearing. Number 4. Sergeant Moody was stationed in New Mexico when he witnessed a meteor shower. As he was watching, a UFO landed right in front of his car. When Moody tried to run, he couldn't get the car to turn on, and then he passed out. Before everything went black, he thought he saw a humanoid shape inside the craft. There was a large chunk of time he couldn't recall, and he later went under hypnosis in an attempt to uncover these repressed memories. According to these memories, when the aliens tried to abduct him, he slammed one of them with his car and punched another. They still managed to subdue him and performed several experiments on him. Number 3. According to 2 teenagers, they were abducted while working at their summer camp, Buff Ledge. They saw a UFO at the docks and could see aliens inside. Then they were hit by a beam of light and didn't remember anything else. They believed they were taken aboard an alien craft and had various samples taken from their bodies. The aliens didn't have ears or lips and only had slits for noses and webbed fingers. One of the teenagers also recounted them wanting world peace for our planet. Independent investigation found that some people who were unaware of their story reported strange lights at the camp on the same night, and others at the camp have reported being abducted. Number 2. 2 twin sisters reported regularly encountering aliens since they were as young as 5 years old. They claimed they would see a light, and then aliens would enter their room and take them aboard their ship. The girls had their own nickname for the aliens, the Bald Men. One of the twins claimed that during an abduction, the entire spaceship became transparent on the inside, and she could look down at the planet below. This story seemed ridiculous, until one day, an unidentifiable footprint was found outside the twins' window, a footprint not belonging to any known creature on Earth. Number 1. In 1978, a man named Dr. Hopkins had been studying a UFO case when he received a mysterious phone call from a man who claimed to represent a UFO organization, which later proved to be false. When Hopkins agreed to talk, the man was at the door immediately. The man was completely bald, even his eyebrows, and didn't actually have lips, but he tried to hide it by wearing red lipstick. He spoke in a monotone voice and made a coin disappear. Then he told the doctor to seize all research and destroy his evidence. The man behaved as if he were running out of power near the end of the encounter and vanished into a light outside. Hopkins had another encounter with the same man, but a similarly odd woman accompanied him. This time, the man made sexually inappropriate comments in addition to behaving in the same strange robotic manner and disappearing mysteriously. Luckily for Dr. Hopkins, this was his last encounter. I was working the night shift at my local Waldbaum's back when it used to be open 24 hours a day. There would normally be less than 10 customers throughout my shift, but I wouldn't get to sit around and do nothing though. They wanted me to work on stock when I wasn't helping a customer. It was a bigger Waldbaum's, so oftentimes there may have been one other person in the building, whether it be someone working on stock or someone cleaning. This night, I was the only one working. I was working stock in the cereal aisle when I heard something fall over on the other side of the shelf in the next aisle over. I would always hear the door to the store sliding open. It was the loudest thing ever, so it kind of caught me off guard that there might have been a customer in the building. Of course, it wasn't weird. Yet. Not until I looked to my left and saw a man standing by the edge of the aisle, shooting me a blank stare. "Do you need something, sir?" I asked him. No. Could you just point me to the eggs?" he said. He wasn't normal looking. His face looked weird. Not exactly ugly, just unusual. Like his upper lip kind of came out too far, almost like a Simpsons character. I was a bit uncomfortable that I had to deal with ringing him up. I hurried to finish the cereal aisle, and when I was done, I began to bring the U-boat cart to the back room. I was stopped halfway when the same guy cut me off through the middle section of the aisle. I want to note this guy was probably in his mid-30s, and at the time, I was only 22, though I looked much younger. The guy stopped me and started trying to make awkward small talk. He started by asking me my name, how old I was, if and where I went to school, and why I was doing the night shift. His questions started to get weirder when he asked me if I went to parties a lot and if I had a girlfriend. I told him I didn't, and then he asked me if I've ever had a boyfriend while putting his hand on my shoulder. I immediately started walking away with the cart, but he followed me. I told him I wasn't into whatever he was thinking about. I went faster and faster until I finally made it to the back storage room. He didn't follow me in. I wasn't supposed to stay back there for extended periods of time to avoid customer theft. I decided it would be best to just wait for him by the register so that he would ring his stuff up and leave. But I waited there for at least 20 minutes. He never came. I decided he was gone, and whether he stole the eggs and something else, there wasn't anything I could do now. I had to go to the bathroom, so I took a quick jog to the back of the store and into the employee bathroom. Moments after sitting on the toilet, my heart dropped into my stomach as I heard the bathroom door open. I choked the urge to say something. Something like, "You can't be in here," but I didn't want to give away my position. I lifted my leg so that I wouldn't be visible from under the stall, and what happened next was simply horrifying. I sat there for the longest time, looking at the floor, not moving a muscle. When I finally looked up, I could see an eye peering through the crack of the stall door. I screamed. I knew I was trapped. I knew I had one shot at making a move. I grabbed the box cutter in my pocket and began sliding it through the crack of the door, forcing him to move his eye away. I took that chance to slam the stall door open in his face and hightail it out of the bathroom and all the way out of the store. I called my boss at least 5 times before he finally picked up and explained everything. He told me to call the cops, and so I did. Of course, the man wasn't in the store anymore by the time the cops showed up. I only did the night shift twice after that, and luckily didn't see the man again. I used to work the night shift at a gas station on the side of some highway in the country. From the hours of 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., the road was pretty dead. I would have maybe 1 or 2 people come in to pay cash in a whole night. It was a very boring and depressing job, especially doing the graveyard shift, but I had just finished college and I needed to pay off my loans. The only reason I kept this job was because my boss threw me an extra $5 an hour for doing the night shift. On this one cold December night, I was doing my usual thing, reading the newspaper, playing games on my phone, and whatnot, when I noticed the headlights of a car pulling off the highway into the parking lot. It was a red pickup truck. Somebody stepped out and shut the door. I went back to reading the paper as I saw that he was standing by the gas pump. I assumed he wasn't paying cash. I looked up a few moments later and saw that he was still standing in the same position, staring at the gas pump. I almost felt obligated to go out and help him. He was obviously confused. I felt a cold chill run up my spine as I saw the 6-foot-something tall man slowly turn his head to face me. I couldn't make out any features of his face, but I knew he was staring at me. I tried to pretend I didn't notice by going back to reading the paper. Of course, I wasn't really reading now. I was a bit shaken by the guy out there. I just wanted him to pay debit or credit and leave. I looked up and gasped as the man was now much closer to the front door of the building. It wouldn't have been so disturbing if it weren't for the fact that he wasn't moving. He was just standing still, as before, still looking in my direction. I walked over to the door to get a closer look. All I could see in his face was still blackness. I locked the door and flipped the open sign to closed on the door. I didn't care if this would possibly get me in trouble. I was not taking a chance because, quite frankly, I was scared shitless. I walked back behind the counter and sat down on one of the containers on the floor just so I couldn't see the man outside anymore. I stayed in that position for a good 5 minutes, texting every friend I have to see who was awake. I was desperate to tell somebody about this. When I finally got up to check that he was gone, I let out a full scream as the man was now right outside the door. I picked up the phone on the counter and called the police. The operator was reluctant to send somebody over because of the way I described the situation, but I persuaded them. I hid behind the counter, balled up like a child. I began to hear heavy thumps at the door, not innocent knocks to catch my attention. I mean thuds and thumps, trying to break down the door, and then eventually it finally stopped. I heard the sound of a car starting outside and then driving off. I looked outside and he was gone. A patrol cop along with a state trooper pulled into the parking lot. I reported the red pickup truck and told them which direction I thought he went in. I couldn't describe his face as all I saw was blackness. Of course, there wasn't much the police could do as the man didn't really do anything. I left that job a few months later to a job in the city. It was 2 years ago. I was called in to do the night shift, 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. at 7-Eleven, since somebody called out. The store was located on a busy road in a rather quiet and rural area. During the night shift, you could expect anywhere from 10 to 20 people come in to buy a beer or something else. This one particular night, there was this one guy, mid-20s, that came in. He started making weird noises, like loud yelling noises. I assumed he had some kind of mental disability. In fact, my brother has a mental disability, so I immediately felt sympathy for the guy. He walked up to the counter without any items, with his head facing me, but his eyes were looking up at the ceiling. I felt uncomfortable. I honestly didn't know how to deal with it. I tried speaking with him, but he only responded in loud noises. I kept checking if he was with someone outside, but he was alone. There weren't any cars in the parking lot, so I assumed he walked. He stood there for so long, looking up at the ceiling and making noises, that I tried to get him out by handing him a bag of chips and telling him he can go. I tried finding some kind of number to call for someone to help him. Then, out of nowhere, he finally turned around and walked out of the store. I felt so horrible for the man, but at the same time, I felt a bit creeped out. About an hour later, the phone on the counter rang. I picked up to hear the familiar yelling sounds of the man from earlier. It caught me off guard. I didn't know what to think, other than this has to be some kind of prank. I hung up on them and was now becoming paranoid of my surroundings, constantly checking the outside through the windows. Come 4 o'clock, the person working after me came in, finally allowing for me to go home. It wasn't my problem anymore. I got home and threw all my stuff on the table, ready to get to sleep. But my phone rang within a minute after entering the door. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would someone be calling at 4 a.m.? I could only imagine it was bad news. I braced myself and picked up the phone to hear the man again. I felt sick to my stomach as I listened to the loud noises he made. I struggled to slam the phone to the receiver. All night I felt like I was being watched, even with all the blinds shut. And I could swear I heard strange noises coming from all over my house. I refused to get any sleep until the sun came up. Weeks passed and I had forgotten about the incident, until one day, when going into the basement for the first time in a while, I found that papers had been scattered all over the floor, and when I went into the basement closet, I found writing on the walls. 7-Eleven had been written in Sharpie on the wall, along with the address to the 7-Eleven I worked at and my house address. The most disturbing part, I also found various kitchen knives, along with a large pocket knife sitting in the closet. What started out as seemingly just an innocent person, turning into something of a prank, ultimately turned into something much more horrifying. He had been living down there for God knows how long, and I'm just grateful that, for whatever reason, he changed his mind and left, because I haven't seen or heard from him since. All I can say is that man is dangerously ill. I've worked in the K-9 unit for 9 years, and I've worked my fair share of graveyard shifts. I've definitely come across weird things at night, but I'll never forget this one night. I worked with my dog Sammy, a German Shepherd. She was 2 years old at the time and was still kind of new to the job, just like me. I was driving down a road surrounded by crops when I spotted a suspicious-looking white van parked inside the crops. Both doors were open. I flashed my lights to try and draw out whoever was there. Nobody came out, so I parked and scanned the place out quickly. Nobody was in sight, so I took Sammy with me to track down the driver of the van. Sammy started going crazy when we reached the trunk of the van. She was pulling so hard she almost broke off the leash. I opened the trunk to the van, and a blast of foul air hit me in the face. I almost passed out from the mix of the horrible smell and the pure shock of what I saw in the trunk. I counted 7 full body bags, each with a pair of feet sticking out at the bottom. I requested immediate backup with my radio. I heard the sound of a twig snapping nearby, and Sammy just lost it. I lost grip of the leash, and she took off into the crops. I pulled out my gun and followed the sounds of her barking. As each and every crop hit me in the face, I felt as if something would reach out and grab me. I stopped when I could no longer hear Sammy's barking. But as I stopped, the sounds of movement did not. I realized I heard movement in all directions. I had never experienced such fear in my life. I stood still as the movement around me stopped. And then, out of nowhere, I felt 2 arms wrap around my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't fight. I was going to die. And then, I heard the sound of Sammy's bark, followed by the scream of the man choking me as Sammy bit down on his leg. The next thing I did was something that I still question if it was appropriate doing to this day. I turned around and pulled the trigger, killing the man. I grabbed Sammy by the leash and ran all the way back to the car. I could tell people were following us from behind. I managed to make it to the car safely and drive a quarter mile down the road. I didn't stop to see which way they went. I didn't hold my ground. I fled like a coward. I cared much more about our lives than I did this job, and I'll still say that today. But it still pains me knowing how much of a coward I was. Backup arrived shortly, but the van was gone. I even failed to get the plate number on dashcam video, or even just writing it down. This was within my first few months on the force, but it made me feel like absolute shit for months to come. I, someone who was sworn to protect, let a van full of killers get away.